Okay, guys, welcome back to another episode 4 of the TMC Talk Show. And today I'm here with Mr. Ray Shaffer. And as we're going to see throughout the duration of this interview, he's done quite a few interesting things in the duration of his career. But probably something that he's most well known for is his time at Brumos. So just to start off, Ray, I was hoping that you could just tell our audience, give them in general terms, why Brumos is such a big name in racing and so heavily associated with the Porsche brand.
Yeah, great question, actually. And you know, Brumos has a wonderful history in racing and with Porsche, and it goes way back. You look at Porsche coming over to the United States back in the early 1950s. You basically had Max Hoffman in the Northeast, who was responsible for bringing Porsche to the United States, really his personal relationship with Ferry Porsche, and starting to import those first cars in the early 1950s, shortly after Porsche started production of the 356. And so what happened was you had Max Hoffman in the Northeast, and you had Johnny von Neumann on the West Coast. And down in the Southeast, you had Hubert Brundage, who is where the BRU part comes from in Brumos' name. And so it was Brundage Motors, and in the Telex machine, it would put together the Brundage motors, and it made Brumos, and that's where the name came from. So Brumos was a very early importer in the Southeast and distributor for Porsche cars, and he was also a racer. So Brumos, as a company, had always been seated in the history of motorsport for Porsche here in the United States. So starting with Hubert Brundage, and then when the company was sold to Peter Gregg in the mid-'60s, Peter, of course, took it to the next level. And Brumos became internationally known in 1973 when Peter Gregg and Hurley Haywood, with one of the prototype 911 RSRs, won the Daytona 24 Hours. And so Brumos has always had a very close working relationship with the factory, pretty much starting in the early 1970s with the racing team that Peter Gregg had. But as an importer in the Southeast, it goes way back to 1959 officially. And so Brumos has been around for a long time. That relationship continued into from the 70s into the 80s. And then in the early 90s, kind of getting back into professional racing as America's racing team, if you will, with the IMSA Supercar program. So the picture that's behind me on the wall here, that was a factory program that was run in North America for the basically showroom stock racing, very successful with the drivers and team championship, 91, 92, and 93. And then even into the 2000s with the Daytona prototype program. And then finally back to GT car racing, which netted Brumos the GT championship in 2011. And so it was a very active part of it was in the DNA for sure. Racing was in the DNA of Brumos just as it is inside Porsche. And the two companies were very close as a result. Now, of course, today Brumos is no longer racing, and they're no longer a franchise Porsche dealership, but the Brumos name does exist with the same owner in the Brumos collection form, which is just an absolutely amazing facility that's in Jacksonville, Florida. And I highly recommend, if you're in that area, to have a look, go see the collection. And of course, you start with their website, which is where the tickets are sold. But just an amazing history. Absolutely. Great question. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I know it's a very loaded question. I actually did take the chance to look at the online gallery for that the Brumos collection down in Jacksonville, and the next time I'm around that area, I'm definitely going to make sure I stop by. But something I kind of want to key in that in that huge amount of information that you just gave us, right?
Sorry about that.
No, there's a lot that we could talk about, right? I mean, even in my research, I saw that there was just so much that went into like the legend of the Brumos team. But one very big contributor to that legend was the 24 Hours of Daytona, right? So can you maybe illustrate for us, paint a picture why it was such an important race?
The 24 Hours itself, or the
especially at Daytona too.
Yeah, well, you know, it's right in Brumos's backyard. Brumos being in Jacksonville, Florida, you're only about, with I-95 built, you know, you're only about just a little over an hour drive south from Jacksonville. you end up right in Daytona. And if you've been down I-95 that way, you can see the speedway from the interstate. And boy, it's just an important part of motorsports history, what's come of what Bill France and the France family have created with the Daytona International Speedway. I mean, it became one of the most important events. For Porsche, the first ever overall 24-hour win that they had came at Daytona. Vic Elford was one of the drivers. He still lives in Florida. The ascent of that event as a 24-hour endurance race, and most of that race, unlike Le Mans, was run in the darkness because it takes place usually in January, beginning of February. And so your days are very short. And so a lot of the racing was run in the darkness, and especially before the speedway was lit up like it is today. So it's a real test of speed for sure, and endurance for the cars and the drivers. And Porsche, having done so much research and development for the street products on the racetrack, that type of test, there just is no better test for a product. And of course, not only did it develop the machines into the wonderful driving pieces that we all know and love, but it also really developed the reputation and sort of the marketing aspect, if you will, of why we love the 911 so much. I mean, I have the 964 Turbo, but again, as you can see by the model in the picture over my shoulder here, I love the fact that it has that connection to the racing car. And so for me, it's very authentic and genuine. And the Daytona 24 Hours played a big role in that.
So then what are some of like the key components that go into creating like a successful race for you guys?
Well, in the team itself, I mean, it all comes down to just that. It's the people. And needless to say, when you have star drivers like Hurley Haywood, who really has spent his entire career with Brumos, and all of his major wins in sports car racing are behind the wheel of a Porsche, you can look at the drivers and say, obviously, that's an important element. But I'm sure Hurley would be the first to tell you that it's the team of people that are there to prepare the car, that engineer the car, that build the car, that maintain the car, that help with the setup, getting the car to the track and back safely. It's all part of that. And it's a huge effort. Even the people, nowadays with social media that are there to tell the story and support that. It's very important when it comes to keeping people interested and the sponsors happy. So it is a huge team effort. And as you know, from going to these events, when you're there, it's a family of people, really, because you're traveling all over the country or all over the world in some cases, and you're seeing the same people at all the events. And it really does become a community of people, very small world, very interconnected, but it's a wonderful one at that. And anybody that's interested in it, I certainly highly encourage it, because it's a great family feel. But so it comes down to people. It really does come down to people.
You joined the Brumos group right back in 1999,
right?
And what was kind of your initial involvement with the team, if you had any at all with the team, or were you more kind of just working at the dealership to start?
Well, I was hired into the dealership as a salesman. And at the time, they only had 2 Porsche salesmen. So I was the third to be hired in. And I was introduced to Bob Snodgrass, who was one of the owners of Brumos Porsche. But he was a very, very important figurehead as the president and general manager of the company, and a racer through and through. I mean, he's in the photo behind me here, standing by the rear wing with Hurley Haywood. And, he really oversaw so much of that history that I was talking about. You go all the way back to the early 70s when his time at Brumos started. The impact that man made on that company can't be understated. So here he is working in that company from basically the early 1970s until I get there, almost the year 2000. So 30 years, right, of all this is incredible input that he had into the company. And so I was hired in to be a salesperson, but I was introduced to him through another racer, Bob Aiken, who was the man behind the Coca-Cola Porsches back in the 1970s and 1980s, the 935s and the 962s, just some of the best looking race cars. And he introduced me to Bob. And so I kind of came into the company with a little bit of an advantage of being known as a racer, thanks to my connection and friendship with Bob Aiken. And so, I went to sell cars there. I worked there 6-7 days a week selling cars because we loved every minute of it. This, as you know, the late 90s, early 2000s. And so any free time that we had, we were either going to the go-kart track there in Jacksonville and running our shifter carts, or we were going to the racetrack when at the time Brumos was running the historic sports cars in the classic racing. And, as a perfect example, I just showed up one Sunday that I had off to the racetrack in Savannah, which was only about 2 hours away from Jacksonville. And, Bob must have been really impressed with the fact that I took my personal time to go watch the race team because, I had aspirations to be a professional race car driver at the time. And so he just kind of walked up to me at the end of his sprint race and said, I'm not going to run this other race in the afternoon. So if you want to drive the car this afternoon in the race, have at it. And I mean, I was floored by the offer. It was an incredible invitation. Of course, I wasn't going to pass it up, even though I didn't have my helmet and my suit with me. I'd find something in the trailer that would fit. But he was that kind of guy. He really helped with opportunities. And so, yeah, I started out as a salesperson, but I think he could see the passion for not only the racing side of it, but just for the business and for Porsche in general. And he really, we really connected on that level for sure.
So then when you initially joined Brumos back in 1999, did you decide to join because you thought that you would maybe potentially become a racer for Brumos?
Well, not necessarily, no. I mean, that the racing aspect, because you have to remember Hurley Haywood is, he's the racer that worked at Brumos. And, he is the most decorated, most successful American endurance race driver ever. He's 5 Daytona 24-hour victories, 2 times at Sebring and at Le Mans 3 times. So, I mean, just an amazing driver, wonderful mentor and instructor as well, and a heck of a vice president for the company. But I mean, sure, I would have loved that, but I didn't go there with that intention. One thing I think I learned from Bob Aiken was who was a very successful businessman first, and then he became a racing driver later in life. And so the example that I always saw was that, you had to have a foundation. And not to say that a professional race car driver can't just do that job, but in my particular case, sort of coming at it at the age that I was and with the aspirations that I had, it made more sense to be successful at business first and then try and open that door of driving. And so for me, that worked out better. And so I was able to continue pursuing my efforts at racing. I did do some professional racing eventually after graduating from the Skip Barber school, and I did their race series, and I graduated from that and went into professional showroom stock racing, which, again, at my age, wasn't going to be the next Formula One driver. At 30 years old, you're pretty much beyond the point of a Formula One driver even then. So I had no false hopes of that. But sports, you can do that for a long time, and I loved it, to say the least. So I continued that for quite a while. And then eventually, when I had the chance to become the sales manager at Brumos, I realized that the time that requires on the job in the building meant that the traveling for racing and what have you would not be as possible. And so I made that decision and point in time to stop the pursuit of professional racing. Still enjoyed it on a vintage aspect, and getting to drive some of the collection cars from time to time really sort of scratched that itch. But at that point in time, I decided I would settle on the business angle and concentrate on being the best sales manager that I could be.
As the general manager then, right? What was kind of your specific role both in like the dealership and on the team?
Well, by the time I became the general manager, which was 2010, we were finishing up with the Daytona prototype program, and we were getting the 911 GT3 to go racing in GT category. And some people might look at that and say, no, well, you were running a prototype in the top category for overall victory, and the team did win the 24 Hours of Daytona in 2009. So really it achieved that, the sort of home race big victory that we really wanted. And so at that point in time, going to the Porsche GT car might have seemed like a step backwards for some people. But if you really understood the inspiration behind it and what the owner, Dan Davis, best described as going back to the roots of the company, which was GT racing. And so that became a very important program. So as the general manager, I think my role at that point in time, both at the store and sort of from the team standpoint, was just to do the best that I could to integrate our efforts of selling Porsches with racing them. We race what we sell. That was what was on the back of the race car. And it's true. And it worked. It inspired a lot of people to do business with us. The GT3 that we were racing, those cars, those 997 Cup cars, the bodies in white basically came off of the assembly line and then were shipped to the racing department. And then from there, they would be turned into race cars. So the connection between the street and the race cars, it was so close that I remember one example in particular where the race team was prepping the car for the next race. And they had an issue with a part. I think if memory serves me correct, it was like a piece of plumbing for the water-cooled system on the back of the car. And they needed to replace it and didn't have the part. And so it was on the weekend. The car was going to have to leave on Monday, and there was no time to order it, have it sent in. So we basically took a GT3 that we had in inventory right on the showroom floor, and we brought it back into the shop and took the part off of that street car and put it onto the race car. I think that part's still on the car. It never broke after that, so why take it off? And we ordered the replacement part for the street car. So it just goes to show you, that racing what we sell and the research and development from what happens on the racetrack to what the customer actually enjoys on the road, that connection is as real as ever.
Do you think that sort of connection then, does that play more to the overall Porsche brand, or did that play very specifically to you guys at Brumos selling more cars at your Jacksonville dealership?
Well, I think for motorsports enthusiasts in general, you look at the cars that are out in NASCAR, for example. I think most of the fans that are for the Ford teams or the Chevy teams realize that the car that they buy in the showroom is pretty far removed from the car that's on the racetrack. But nevertheless, there's sort of like this honor to be associated with the brand as a result of what's happening on the racetrack. That's true with Porsche, but then you have the added connection of the actual technology. And so that's where sports car racing is really, even Formula One is a little bit removed, I think, in that respect. But in sports car racing, it always comes back to the manufacturer being able to develop the technology from that. And, you look at the 919 hybrid program that just finished up recently. What was learned in that program, is applied to the Taycan. And what's learned in the Formula E program, that's ongoing. So the learnings from all that get applied to what we actually produce and sell. And so I think the people that are Porsche customers are in tune to that idea. So then when you take it to the dealership level, like we had at Brumos, it was local, and it was even more connected. I mean, when Hurley wasn't traveling for the race, he was there in the dealership, and he would come down and talk to customers if they had a question. He test drove and approved the cars that we delivered to the customers. He was the final person to drive the cars. So, there was a real connection there that was so much fun to be a part of that. And if you ever have some folks from Jacksonville on your show in the future, whether you're talking to Hurley or you're talking to somebody that, that's from there, you ask them about that, because that's a real connection. And these people are still friends of mine. I still go to Porsche events and we connect, we talk on the phone. It's a real connection. So I think what we did was we just took it to the next most personal level that we could.
All right. That's something that, like, I feel it's kind of a different idea to me, because I'm used to watching a lot of Formula One, and I don't really think of it on like a dealership level about like creating personal connections and stuff like that. So that's a interesting, fresh perspective on that.
Well, it is a lot of fun. And I mean, when you think about it, you probably see it. I mean, I would imagine that when Formula One travels to Canada, let's say at Montreal for the Grand Prix, my guess is that the dealerships there, be it Mercedes-Benz or Infiniti or Aston Martin or whoever's involved in it. In the case of Formula E, I know we do it with Porsche, even though we don't sell an open wheel race car, we sell the Taycan. But at the local dealership events, I know a lot of dealers will promote open houses where they, come in and meet the drivers type kind of thing. So maybe Lewis Hamilton's going to the Mercedes-Benz dealer or something of that nature. They do a lot of promotional tours. Our guys were doing that. We had Andrew Davis and Lee Keane, and they were visiting. They would come to our store, and before the 24 hours, we would have a big kickoff event. So we had a lot of fun with that for sure. I mean, you would go, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to meet Lewis Hamilton in a Mercedes dealership, for sure, I would do that.
I'm with you on that.
Now, as general manager, you've spoken to it quite a great deal, right? You worked in the dealership and you worked on the race team, and obviously those two facets of your job worked in conjunction and were interwoven. But did you see yourself, putting more effort or more time into one particular part of the job than others?
Well, without a doubt. I mean, as a general manager, my main responsibility, and 95% of the time, was there in the store. The race team itself, I didn't manage the race team or have anything to do in that respect. There was we had Skip Shinsing, who was hired into Brumos to be the team manager, who put together the personnel to get that GT program up and running. And he so far exceeded expectations by winning the championship in 2011, which was about a year before we thought that would actually happen. It was amazing. Of course, we had great drivers and we had the great people that we were talking about earlier. But Skip really is the one that managed that. So after the team was broken up in 2013, when we decided to stop racing at that point, Skip actually came in and started working as the service manager in the dealership. And he's still there today at Porsche of Jacksonville as the service manager. And so, again, there's just more connection of that on the track experience, helping customers on a daily basis in the dealership level. So my personal involvement with it was more around the promotion of it and making sure that we were helping keep customers connected with the racing efforts that we were doing on the track. And the team personnel like Skip and the drivers and Hurley had a very big management role in that team. He started out as a co-driver in the endurance races with Andrew and Lee. But then when he retired from active driving, his management role in the team just got even larger. And so, they're just incredible people with amazing experience making that happen. It was an honor to be a part of it, even in the small way that I was from the marketing side.
So just to kind of round out the questions I have just on the Brumos topic.
Yeah.
Why did you guys ultimately decide to stop racing in 2013?
It's a good question. I think, the way racing goes with the different manufacturers involved in it, we were not, obviously Brumos was a dealership team. It was not a factory team. It wasn't a manufacturer in it. We had certainly a very close relationship with Porsche Motorsport North America. They're wonderful partners that built the engines and helped out a lot at the track. But the decision really comes down to financial, I think, in that case. It was privately owned dealership, privately run race team. We weren't part of a big dealer group like AutoNation or one of those publicly held groups. And so when you look at the expense of it, it probably, even though I wasn't involved in that decision, my guess is it probably came down to a lot of the finances of it. And of course, as we ultimately came to see this decision to stop racing at the time was a few years ahead of actually selling the dealership and then moving into the phase that Brumos is in now, which, I've been out of Brumos now for about 5 years. And so, I wasn't involved in any of that transition. But certainly you can see, if you're looking back on it now, you can kind of see a transition to where they are now. And again, where they are now is this incredible facility that educates the public about the innovation and the history of not only Brumos and Porsche together, but also technology and automobiles dating back to the early 1900s, as you know from having looked at the website.
What was kind of the general consensus among like people working in Brumos? Was everyone like just very dejected, felt like was there a premonition that maybe the dealership was going to go in a completely different direction, be sold, that sort of thing?
No, I don't think so at the time. I mean, obviously we were disappointed because we love racing. And when you walked into the dealership back in this time period, you would be greeted by a full wall of trophy cases with everything from that 1973 Daytona 24-hour trophy that I mentioned to the 24 Hours of Le Mans and all the other victories and championships that the teams were responsible for over the years. So I think we always had the perspective that there were times when we were racing and there's times we were not racing. And that was normal. So I think that part, other than being disappointed that we weren't going to be going to the races with our own car, we just kind of saw it as normal. In fact, in the beginning of 2015, we actually brought the name back on Patrick Dempsey's team for one race for the 24 Hours of Daytona with car number 58. And so we were able to go down and help out and cheer along and what have you in that sense. So, I mean, it still comes back from time to time. And I wouldn't be surprised in the future if you saw it again. Again, not because I know anything that I'm sort of letting out as a secret. It's not that. It's just that looking back in history, you see them coming in and out of the racing programs from time to time. And so that's kind of normal.
Now to just kind of shift gears almost, I want to kind of talk about what you're doing currently. You actually work for Porsche North America now, right? And I know that you do, a great variety of things with your new job. So I was just hoping, again, could you maybe talk us through some of what you do currently?
Yeah, I will. I'll try to keep it short too. So good luck on that one. I tend to love talking about it. But so when I left Brumos, I had this experience, 28 years worth of retail experience, basically since I left school, and I always loved the retail car environment. And so at the time, Porsche Cars North America was opening the Experience Center in Atlanta, and it was the first time ever really that a manufacturer like that had a mix of both retail facility along with a corporate headquarters. And the real difference is that, at Porsche Cars North America, the customer that they have are the franchise dealers. They're the ones that import the cars and sell the cars to the dealer network, who then sells them to the end user. And so here I was with the retail experience, able to go into an environment that was used to more of wholesale experience. And so as we were setting up this retail environment and wanting to bring to life a new vehicle delivery program, which is similar to the tourist delivery that they had been doing over in Stuttgart for some years, we wanted to set that up in Atlanta. We had the classic factory restoration workshop. We had the mechanical workshop that looks after the fleet of new Porsches that are used out on the driving experience development track that we have there for customers to enjoy. And then a museum, finally, the Heritage Gallery, which would basically be like a showroom and displaying the history and heritage of Porsche cars. And so I had basically the experience in the background to know how to bring that to life. And so this really unique job opening, which just feels like a once in a lifetime kind of thing, just happened to fit the timing perfectly of what my experience was. It's the experience meeting the opportunity, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. So since coming into that, now that the new vehicle delivery program is up and running, and the growth of the classic program has been so quick and so extreme in such a short period of time, that in 2018, that's when my job role shifted, and we now look to grow the brand Porsche Classic. And so there's a lot of that to come in the future. I still keep the responsibility of being the curator for the Heritage Gallery, because most of the cars that are in there tend to be classic. And so it makes sense. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. I have a really interesting opportunity to spend time with incredible Porsche cars and incredible Porsche people.
What are some of the coolest classic cars you've probably seen in the last couple of years working, with the Porsche Experience Center?
Well, gosh, I mean, the Carrera GT, the super sports car with the V10 engine and the carbon fiber, I can see the smile on your face just when I mention it. I mean, that's an incredible car. Hard to believe, but that technically is one of our Porsche Classic vehicles. The last one was built in 2006 for the European market. And so that means that after 10 years, the responsibility of producing parts for that car is shifted from the production department at Porsche to the classic department. And so in 2016, that car became our responsibility. And so those cars in our shop, of course, I was connected with those cars when they were new. I started with Porsche back in 1999, as you pointed out. The concept car was introduced to the public in the year 2000. So I've basically had a connection with that car ever since it was first announced. And today it's our responsibility to take care of it as a classic vehicle. And we produced just over 1,200 of the cars for the world. There were roughly, if memory serves me correctly, there were somewhere around 700 and some that came to the United States. So they're pretty rare cars, but you do see them at events that you go to, and we service the cars and we take care of them. We did a very special project around one of them, a recommission project, where we basically took one and made it new again to the specifications of its owner, as if he were ordering it new from the factory today. And so that car is really special. It's fun to be around. The 959, of course, is another Porsche classic vehicle that is a lot of fun to experience because it's such a technological leader that, I remember that car back in the 1980s. It's such a spaceship. So much technology in that car was tried for the first time that today we take for granted in just about every car out on the highway. But that was the first car to do it, and Porsche were the ones to create it. And so we see those in the classic workshop. And then on a more sort of day-to-day basis, if you will, the last of the air-cooled 911s, the 964s and the 993s. Those cars, I have a soft spot for those cars in particular, having had a chance to own one of each. They're just incredible cars, and I highly recommend them to anybody. And of course, I'm also a big fan of the transaxle cars. There's a model of one right over here behind me. This is a 924 Carrera GTR in that case. But I love driving those cars. They're relatively affordable to own nowadays. But the balance of those cars with the transaxle, that means the transmission is in the back of the car instead of right up behind the engine in the front. So the weight balance is just about a perfect 50-50 weight distribution. And so when you drive those cars, whether it's on the road or out on the racetrack, they're a blast to drive. And so there's an opportunity to get involved in a classic vehicle for something you don't have to spend a huge amount of money to do.
Yeah, I've definitely been very interested in something like a 944, 924, just as a potential project car, something like that for someone of my age. So for sure, I've looked into that.
Have you driven one yet?
Like a 924 or 944?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's kind of, just looking around the website, something like that, seeing what things are in my area, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, you'll find a friend that has one, and then maybe they'll get you behind the wheel. But even riding in the car, I mean, it's they're pretty special cars. They really are, and they're well built too. There's again a perfect example. I mean, they're built back in the 1980s, and when you close the door, the nice thunk that they make. I mean, they're solid cars.
For sure. So I just want to switch gears a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I guess, more, I don't want to say generic, but a bit more focused on you. You've obviously spent a lot of your career, on the business end, looking into things more related to business. So what type of personal characteristics do you think have made you kind of optimized, per se, for doing that sort of role?
Well, attention to detail pays off a lot. And that focus that detail requires will serve you well in business as well as in driving a car on something like a racetrack when you're trying to hit all your marks and do what you need to do. The ability to sort of process all that and make sure that you're getting done what you need to do. Racing forces the issue because you have a very tight time frame. Whatever the distance of the race is, whatever your time in the car is, a race weekend is pretty much a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So when you show up, everything has to be ready. You have to make sure that you hit all your marks. And there's a lot of transfer between winning on the track and winning in business. And I think, it's a great study actually, because you can see so many similarities, which is why I think you see a lot of former race car drivers. You and I were talking offline about Bobby Rahal. Bobby, as a championship winning race car driver, he's a 3-time kart IndyCar champion. He's an Indianapolis 500 winner. He's won the 24 Hours of Daytona. He's won the 12 Hours of Sebring, both in Porsches. race cars, I might add. But during that time period, he got involved in business. Not only was he running his racing team, and by the way, he was good friends with Bob Snodgrass, and he was a dear friend of Brumos Porsche, and that's how I came to know him. Obviously, he was a hero of mine when I was a kid watching racing, but I got to know him more on the business end of it because of that connection. He became a car dealer, and now the Ray Hall Auto Group up in the Ohio and Pittsburgh area is a very successful dealership group. And it's the same thing for him. It's an attention to detail that you run with the racing team that works in business. And you not only look at it from your own standpoint, but from that team perspective that we were talking about earlier, making sure that everybody's functioning like a team, whether it's a pit crew or whether it's a sales team and a service team in a dealership, that thought process transfers.
So just to kind of circle back around to some of the things you learned, working for Brumos, what experiences have you been able to take with you into your new job and been able to use on a daily basis?
The experience that, the being involved with people, I think, and making sure that the opportunity for win-win situations is apparent in everything that you do. And so as a salesperson, that really spoke to me, because selling Porsche cars, you knew that when the person made the decision to buy the car, to give you their money in exchange for the car that you were giving them, you were very confident that it was a very fair exchange, that they were going to be happy with what they were buying. And so that win-win situation was just a given in that. I don't think I could ever be a salesperson that could sell somebody something that I didn't believe in myself. And so I always looked at it as a win-win situation. And in any negotiation that you're involved in, you have to have that in mind. I think that it needs to benefit everybody involved. And so whenever I looked at whether I was the general manager at Brumos Porsche, I'm trying to figure out, if we're going to do a racing program and we have a sales program and we've got these customers and there's this enthusiasm, how do we make sure that everybody benefits from it? What's the win-win situation? And it's no different today with what we do with Porsche Classic, making sure that if we have dealer partners that are involved in the program, what do they get from it? What's the win-win situation? And that cycle of it. We had a really good example of a relationship with the local Porsche Club of America when I was in the Jacksonville region with the dealership there, being involved with them and making sure that they benefited from the relationship that we had and what we could do together. And the dealership benefited from them. So here's a perfect example. Whenever we would have an event and we would have 300 people show up, we wanted to get the word out about it. We needed help from knowledgeable people. We only had a staff that was so large at the dealership because on a day-to-day basis, we didn't need a big staff. But when it comes to hosting a 300-person event and you want people around who can speak knowledgeably about what's going on, well, with the Porsche Club, you have ambassadors in that environment, if you will, that are very knowledgeable in what they talk about. And so we were able to partner with them in that way. And so again, it's a win-win situation. And I think that's something that really served me well and continues to serve us well today.
I think that's admirable that you had, and as a salesperson, you had a true trust in the product. And I think that probably made the experience better for everyone in the end.
Absolutely. You have to have it. I mean, it's, you just knew that the company was going to do the right thing and take care of the customer. And, there's a saying that says that the sales department might sell the first car to the customer, but the success of the service department and how they take care of the customer, that determines whether or not you'll get to sell them a second or a third or a fourth car. And it's very true. And so that just goes to show you again that, the servicing, taking care of that relationship is so important.
My last question for you, hopefully you have to think about this a little bit. In your long career, what has been your single most favorite moment?
Oh, I just have to pick one, guys. Wow. And I'm not done yet either. I hope I have a long way to go. So yeah, up to this point. Okay. I appreciate you making that distinction. So, but, oh man, wow. The ones, it's hard to pick one because there's so many. I mean, I think of, um, gosh, just there's so many wonderful people. I mean, I can give you an example. I don't know that it's the one, but it's a pretty good one. So, being involved in motorsport history and racing like I have been, and wanting to drive and having that desire, I was very honored that the ownership of Brumos, Bob Snodgrass, Dan Davis, the management, Charlie, Tom, that they trusted me with these, to me, what are priceless vehicles that are in the collection. The car that won Daytona in 1977, or the car that won the first ever IMSA GT championship. These were cars, the car in the picture behind me, the IMSA supercar, actually getting a chance to drive these cars was such an honor that I never took for granted. Well, one year, it was the 50th anniversary of the 24 Hours of Daytona. And the Historic Sports Car Racing Group put together a display of as many previous winners of the race that they could muster. And I think they ended up getting like 27, 28 cars. Every one of them a previous winner of the Daytona 24 Hours. Well, we had one of them in the collection. We had the 77, which is a Porsche 911 RSR factory race car. And they were going to enter it in this, basically it's a parade. It's a parade of cars that go around. Well, for 2 laps, you're behind the pace car. And then after that, they would drop the green flag. And for the rest of the half hour, you just go as fast as you wanted to, so that everybody that's there could see the cars and hear them make some great noise. And Hurley was busy that year with the management of the team, as I mentioned. And so they asked me to drive the car. And it was just this greatest honor, because not only were there these previous winners in the form of the cars, but a lot of the previous drivers, like Bobby Rahal, like Brian Redman, Scott Dixon was one of the drivers, Dario Franchitti was one of the drivers, David Donahue, just an amazing lineup. Brian Redman, if I didn't already say his name, just an amazing lineup of people who I just so, idolized, these amazing drivers. To be in that drivers meeting is something I'll never forget. And then, of course, to actually get in the car and drive it with Brian Redman next to me in the 76 Daytona winner, which was a BMW, just an incredible experience that I'll never forget. So I'm thankful for those opportunities. There's a lot of them when it comes to a company like Brumos and Porsche, but that's one in particular that pops to mind.
Well, that sounds like a good experience to have.
Unforgettable.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for talking about your experiences, and it was a great pleasure to sit down and speak with you and hear what all you have to say.
Well, thank you, Sid. I appreciate the opportunity. It's really cool what you're doing, and I encourage you to keep doing it, because it's a great opportunity for you to speak to so many people in this family community that I spoke of earlier. So kudos to you for reaching out.
Yeah, thank you. Hey there, guys. Just again, thank you for taking your time to watch my interview with Ray. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it just as much as I enjoyed talking to him. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about Ray, I put his Instagram down below, so make sure to check that out. Also, as usual, just make sure to like and subscribe. Those type of things really help me out, and just let me know that I'm headed in the right direction and I'm making stuff that you guys like. But until then, see you guys next time.